Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Denine Pezone. I'm actually the owner of Ardent Associates, and I'll be acting as your host today for this webinar. And actually what you'll see is this session is actually being conducted as a panel discussion on the subject of footwear. And so for a couple of logistics and some housekeeping items, we will be recording this session, so it will be available to the panelists and participants afterwards. We'd ask you to mute just to make sure that we don't get any background noises, but please feel free to raise your hand or enter a conversation in the chat. I'll be trying to pay attention to that too. If we don't get to all of the questions during the conversation here, we definitely will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation itself. So again, this is a panel discussion. What you'll see is we'll transition between a discussion between the panelists on subjects of footwear and materials, and then balance that with our discussion from a survey we did with consumers on the same questions that we'll be talking about today. This is meant to be fun, interactive, and informative. So the group of experts that you'll hear from today got together as we began asking questions of how consumers value footwear and their expectations on the components and the construction of their shoes. As this evolved, the team at Quartr developed and conducted a survey to find out about consumer preferences and their experiences with shoes. So this is what we'll be sharing today, and we've had so much fun doing this, so we hope you get the same enthusiasm out of what we've done together as we share the results of this conversation. So you'll see again today the balance between our industry perspectives versus how our consumers responded to our survey. Our discussion will be interactive, and we will be putting you to work as well. So we're going to ask you to participate in polls, which will populate as we go through this discussion. We'll ask you the same questions that we asked our panelists as well as our consumers, and we'll see how the relevant information results. So let's go on and meet our panelists. Stefan Schoeffel is located in Nuremberg, Germany, so he's joining us a little late today. Thank you, Stefan. He's been working with Suedwolle Group for 8 years now. He's responsible for circular knitting yarns for the footwear and apparel markets. Stefan is an avid biker who rides to work every day. Doesn't matter, rain, snow, shine, Stefan is always on his bike. And he's also one of the few Europeans who knows more about American sports than most Americans know. So we love that about him. Welcome, Stefan. Next is Sarah Schlenger. Sarah is the R&D commercialization manager for the Americas for the Woolmark Corporation. Sarah joined Woolmark in 2013. In her role, she assists with trade, wool education, and advanced concept integration of wool into footwear, apparel, and interiors. She has a wealth of experience in materials and product development. Her journey began 15 years ago in textile science, animal husbandry, and agriculture. She has a passion for the wool industry, which began during her time spent in the merino sheep stations in New Zealand. Sarah just passed a big birthday, but we won't tell you which one it is. So thank you for joining us from San Francisco, Sarah. Next is Connie Huffa is our next panelist, and Connie is one half of the husband and wife team of the advanced textile engineering firm Fab Designs, Inc., known for developing the 3D knitting shoes that were launched in 2008. You probably have seen or heard from Connie in many different forms. She's an industry writer and contributor and actively speaks on the topics of innovation and textile technology. Connie joins us from LA, where she also acts as a mentor in Made It in LA program. So great to have you with us too, Connie. Thank you. We're also joined by Katie Szumowski, and Katie is an accomplished marketing, digital, and media professional and entrepreneur in both the corporate and startup environments, who is equally comfortable with consumer insights and creative delivery as with data and technology. Katie believes in the marriage of art and science is where the magic happens and where business value is created. Her passion for all things digital has driven her expertise in consumer experience and transformation in leadership roles at Verizon, Turner Broadcasting, Vantage, and Quartr. Located in Atlanta, Katie is an avid tennis player and aspiring golfer who loves photography, friends, and family. And lastly, we are fortunate to have the pleasure of having Tim Rich join us. Tim is the co-founder and chief digital officer of the Convergence Collective. He joins us as his role as a strategic advisor for data and insights with Quartr. What you'll hear today is the art and skill of storytelling that Tim brings to life. And he'll be sharing with us the consumer data that was sourced from the Quartr platform, and it'll be lively and informative discussion. So with that, we're going to start our conversation now. And while we begin, we're going to ask you, you'll see these polls populate. So we're going to ask you to help us and see if your data and your experiences match what we've learned from the consumer perspective as well. So with that, let's begin. So Sarah, can you tell us what your earliest memory of an experience with shoes are, good or bad, and how old you are and what you remember?
So I have two. I think the first was a pair of saddle shoes. So like the traditional white shoes with a black leather strap over the middle of them. And I didn't really like them. But the pair I remember getting that I did like, probably around 4, was a pair of jelly shoes. And I grew up on a farm. I wore them all over the farm. It drove my mom crazy because my socks got so dirty. But I loved them.
Great, thank you. So Katie, do you have any memories of shoes?
I do. I think it was a good one, but I happen to be the youngest of 4 girls, and we were very close in age. And just being the youngest, as if anybody else experiences that, it's not often you got something new. And so my first, memory of shoes, believe it or not, was ballet slippers, and I was fortunate to get my very own. I wore them like shoes, but that was the first memory I have because they were pretty, they were pink, they were comfortable, and it was like being out without shoes on. So that comes to mind when you ask that question.
That's wonderful. So Tim, we'll turn it over to you and talk about what we've learned from both Quartr, who we are, and the experiences that we had from the consumers on this subject.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Denine. Hello, friends. My name is Tim Rich, and we're going to talk about some data today that we've collected. So what first and foremost is the platform, right? So what is Quartr and how did we get this? So what Quartr is Quartr is an online app, and participants are remunerated for participating in these surveys. And there's a number of key reasons around this. First off, there's a ton of behavioral science work that's been done that shows that people are far more accurate and honest when there is something in it for them. Big shocker. That, by the way, that rocked the academic world when that came out. And what's also interesting is there's a gamification that takes place, right? And because what we're trying to do is we're trying to inspire behaviors. And one of the inspired behaviors that we're seeking to, inspire is subsequently this honesty and accuracy. So what you're going to see as we begin to move through this data is these questions that we've put together. And we didn't really go at it in a very traditional manner. We had a methodology that we applied, and you'll see that come out here. But what I really wanted to touch on about this platform is that it is an active community, right? So some places have panels, that is where it's a set group of individuals and you go to those same individuals every time and they are in effect professional survey takers. We have a community that is constantly dynamic and moving as individuals come in and exit these communities. It's quite amazing. Check it out. It's in the App Store and iOS. And that's where we got this data. So without further ado, let's dig in and get under the hood a little bit. The current community, we're rolling around 17,000 individuals. We're at 5 million data points. We got numbers and they're large. But the key points in this one is that, frankly, they're custom audiences, right? So as I mentioned before, this isn't a panel, right? This is an organic community. And that audience composition that we've got is really, really statistically robust, right? And if there's anybody out there who's interested in learning more of the statistical nature of this, just reach out. There's emails everywhere. And we'd be happy to talk about this. But this is where we drew from for these insights. So for this panel, we found 1,000 individuals, and they roughly broke across the age spectrum, right? We're seeing 18 to 24, right? About 28%. 33% of our sample was 33 to 54, 55 over on the tail. What's interesting here is this aligns really well to the millennial subgroup, and it also aligns very well to active shoe buyers. Because what I've noticed is this is my uncle gets over 55, he can't tie his shoes any longer, so he switches over to Velcro. So maybe that's not as applicable for the style we're going for. Suffice to say, the millennials here are looking good. What's also interesting is when we pulled this 1,000 individuals, you'll see a rough equal split amongst gender. We do over-index a little more on ladies, which might be advantageous because shoes is often more associated with purchase behavior in that group. So that's interesting that we are getting insights from this active purchasing community, as well as the gentlemen who, of course, need to clad their feet as well. When we start to look at the geographic display of this is very interesting to me. You can start to see how this is very heavily represented in population centers, which makes perfect sense, right? As you grab a sample, the more people who are in a certain location, the more statistical likelihood you are to grab those individuals. You'll see here we have a really great distribution across the East, moving down and over up onto the West Coast. We have community members all over the United States. So while we don't have anything in North Dakota in this particular sample, if you need the North Dakotan point of view, we're your company. So this is where we drew these individuals from. So as we start to move forward into this, let's take a look at what we found, right? So that's our community. The first question that we asked, right, is very similar to the one that we just posed to you, all you fine members of this webinar. And this is, when you think about the earliest pair of shoes you wore, how old were you when you wore that pair, right? Now, the interesting part of this is pre-priming. You'll notice that we say when you think about, right? We are trying to get the participant into that mindset, right? To imagine them to be more emotively engaged in that question, right? Not surprising, everybody goes from age 1 to 5. It's not surprising because that's when memories are made, right? So this aligns very well to cognitive behavioral psychology, but it starts to become more nuanced as we dig down deeper. So from those 1 to 5 individuals, right, we did an open question, right? We're like, hey, what about these memories do you have around this? And I thought that we pulled a few of these out, right? And one of the interesting things that all these had in common, well, the vast majority rather, is that it was a gift. It was this action of 2 people, right? And you'll see it in these, it really typifies it. I realized my parents got me, right? I remember my mom buying me, right? A pair of Jordans my parents bought me, right? And it becomes a two-way street. Right. I think that as I've gotten older, I shop for my own shoes now, and it is no longer that two-way street. This is a very interesting idea, I think. I'm an old ad guy, and this actually has a lot of interesting ideas for kind of like brand placement and thinking about how we create scenarios with which to talk about materiality and shoes and community, because we're seeing that very clearly in these early thoughts. Right.
And so what it looks like from the survey that we've done both on the Quartr platform as well as our attendees here, 76% say, great, I love shoes. So it really does create an environment of shoes are an important experience as part of our lives. So let's go on to the second part then. If shoes are an important experience of our lives, how do you feel now about shoes, and how do you feel when you have to go purchase a new pair of shoes? So Stefan, tell us a little bit about when you feel about how you feel when you need to purchase shoes.
Thanks, Denine. Good evening, good morning, in some cases, maybe even good night, everybody. What can I say? Shoes, when I buy them, I feel great. I mean, of course, I almost never leave the house without shoes. That may also play a role here. And then when I get to the shop, I see this nice offer, colorful, different materials. So I can already in that situation, imagine myself wearing all these nice shoes. So let's take an example. I'm out shopping for bike shoes, and can I say I see the bikes, I see the shoes, I see myself in front of the peloton, climbing up these nice mountains in France. all during the shopping experience with shoes. So yeah, in one sentence.
You have
I
a
could
very
speak
vivid
about
expression of
hobbies.
shoes.
Reality is sometimes a little bit different then, yeah. Already the little hill behind my house might be enough for me. So it doesn't need to be the
So
most
Katie,
mountain.
do you have an experience with needing or wanting to purchase shoes as well?
I do. I think I align pretty closely with what Stefan was saying. I think about shoes daily, whether they're tennis shoes, golf shoes, flip-flops, pumps, boots, you name it. I probably look at some type of a shoe site every single day, and I find it exciting. I find it exhilarating. I find it rewarding. And similar to Stefan, I also leave the house with shoes on. So it's an important part of what I'm shopping for. I don't know how everyone else feels, but certainly during, the pandemic, it seems to be the only thing that I have really been going out and purchasing. And so perhaps my experience and desire and excitement has been heightened because of what we're all going through right now. But definitely high on my list when someone wants to go shopping, I'm all in, especially if it's for shoes.
That's wonderful. Sarah, how about you? Any experiences with shoe shopping?
I'm kind of more on the I dread it side because I like my shoes. I like my shoes comfortable and reliable, broken in, and a new pair of shoes is always daunting. You don't know how they're going to make your feet feel after the first time you wear them, and I need my shoes to be reliably comfortable. So I'm more on the meh to dreading it side.
All right, Tim, tell us what our consumers shared with us when we did the surveys, please.
You got it. So what we asked is we said today, does buying a new pair of shoes feel exciting or like a chore? And the reason we formed the question in this way is we really wanted to create a cognitive split in the answers, right? So the vast majority of people reflect that it is exciting. And this actually honestly mathematically reflects our panel as well, right? The same kind of polarity. But what's interesting is that as we start to dig deeper into this, right, we start to understand and be able to dimensionalize what is exciting. And when we start to look at this insight with the previous one about perhaps combinations of buying, right? Initial excitement with communities, mom buying me the shoes. You'll remember those verbatims a few slides north. This kind of specificity starts to be able to dimensionalize the excitement that we would want to, say, communicate through messaging and advertising type objects, right? So let's keep rolling here. Absolutely. So this is about the excitement. Let's get into really understanding more because I was interested in this excitement. And so we dug deeper into this idea. So what we said was, once again, you'll see this is heavily priming oriented, right? And we said, imagine finding a new pair of shoes that you really like, right? So this is very priming oriented, right? Trying them on and finding that they fit perfectly without thinking too much. What's that feeling like? Well, the reason we did without thinking too much is there is this idea that we have that we're all operating unconsciously a lot, right? And it's very true. Like when you think about the acts that you've did that's brought you to this seat, to this webinar right now, many of those acts today were done unconsciously. And what we try to do with quick responses is get at that unconscious layer, right? And so what we're seeing here is we asked all these people, this was, by the way, an open text field. So happiness is a category. We didn't say pick happy, pick energize, pick comfort. These are all open text, right? And 28% of our respondents responded in the happy, right? So this is like great, good, content, awesome, right? Another one is energized, right? Amazing, awesome, fresh. You see these, the way the words is, and then comfort, soft, warm, heaven. What we're starting to see here is we have a feeling, we have an energy, and then we have a tactile nature of this. And that tactility is really expressed. No, you're doing just right. Please, this is perfect. Take a look. These are the verbatims themselves, right? And I threw a quick highlight on here, but a lot of these words are subsequently incredibly tactile, comfortable, soft, warm, snug, walking on a cloud, flexible, right? Cozy, right? What all of a sudden, lightweight, right? We're starting to see that this actually starts to have some specific features now, right? So we've gone from a general sample to general feelings, to more specific feelings, to trying to catalyze what's happening at the sale. And now all of a sudden we're getting into specifics of these shoes. So let's take one more slide, please, my friend. And what we've started to see is that these people are emotions, right? We're in this trifecta of drivers, right? Emotionality, tactileness, and then the feeling and the memory of this, right? And we then started to go into the features, right? So, okay, so if we have this trifecta of buying behavior that we've started to isolate in this group of individuals, let's start driving down to understand the real tactical responses that we could do with shoes themselves to drive purchase behavior, right?
So as we've been talking to, what we've seen here from our attendees group too is shoes are our jam, right? So a 53% really feel that purchasing shoes are a good experience. And then followed by not so eventful for me. So if we feel that shoes evoke some kind of an emotion, how much of the response do we feel like is attributed to the materials of footwear? So this was another thing that we asked of our survey questions. So Connie, from the wool development side, what kind of experiences do you have with shoes and materials development?
Sure. Thank you for having me. As a textile engineer, designer, I think all of us, anybody who's on this event knows me. We start from the fiber up. We start to figure out what does the customer actually want, and we empathize with the customer. And the data that Tim just gave us is basically a gold mine. So we're looking at what the customer actually wants, the movements that they're going to do. We break the shoe down into different zones. And we try and find different materials that are going to give those different dimensions to that customer, those qualities. And there's a wisdom that I really like, and it's Muhammad Ali says, it's not the mountain that wears you down, it's the pebble in your shoe. We need to find comfort. What is the problem that we're trying to solve for each individual customer? But today, it's not just materials. Customers have added another demand. They want to have things that are recyclable. They want to have things that are natural. They want to have things that don't have these materials of concern, chemicals. They don't want things that are going to land in landfills forever and a day. They want to have things that are mindfully created. They want to have things that are durable, recyclable, and so many are looking for natural fibers. And wool is nature's key performance fiber. There's so many different variations. So we can break down the different zones of the foot from the toe box all the way to the heel, and even the liners and the insoles. And we can put different types of wool or different structures of wool or different types of performance wool in each individual area. Modern technology is great in that we can actually put fibers where they need to be. Wool is naturally insulative against heat and cold. So if I'm making a running shoe or a hiking boot, I don't have to worry about if it's going to get too hot or too cold because wool regulates the local environment around the foot. It also naturally wicks the sweat off the foot and evaporates. It's also naturally antimicrobial so that you don't have a lot of the odor. You can wash it, you can rinse things out, and it's much more good against the skin than a synthetic, which might actually absorb the sweat and then it gets locked in and then it's there forever. It's also a naturally resilient fiber. So every little fiber acts like a little spring. So if I'm using it as an insole, it actually insulates the shock for joints. So if you have this heat and cold insulative, but also an insulative against shock. So if you're looking for something that is for, say, aging baby boomers, something of a wool insole is actually a pretty cool idea.
That's great. Well, and Stefan, you sit at the very beginning of the supply chain in developing materials. How do you feel about the contribution of materials in footwear?
It's great. All starts, as you say. Yeah, I mean, it all starts with the material we have to provide for the designers and for the people who work in the whole process, and where also the ideas come from. And in the end, we have to provide those ideas that consumers can later on be emotional about the footwear that they are looking at. Nowadays, we all understand this. Yeah? Consumers, they already have a certain idea when they see a polyester or polyamide or a cotton product. And of course, it's the same with wool. Yeah? When they see it in the shop, they recognize it. They have a certain imagination about this item, how it might feel, how it might, the haptic might be, how it might be when it's on the feet. Actually, that's where we deliver our input then, together with the designers and the makers of the product.
That's perfect. Thank you. And I think that we saw a lot of the same, Tim, as we started conducting some of the consumer research as well, and what they returned to us and those benefits.
So as we started to ask about materiality, which I think is a fascinating question to get into to our consumers, because I believe it's one of those things that while we constantly look at, as the data here is showing, we're not always aware of it as much, right? And it's interesting here that this middle group sometimes, like whatever color that is, I don't see colors very well, friends, so I'm not even going to take a stab at these reds or greens that we see here, but rather this 41% band, this sometimes when I look for a specific material, right? The interesting thing about this is the marriage of this sometimes with utility, right? And both of the panelists spoke about how wool has these utility functions. And I think it's very interesting to start to think about, is the shoe itself actually being put forth as a utility object out front? Stefan mentioned biking shoes, right? Being an avid cyclist myself, you don't do much walking in a biking shoe, and it's a heavily utility driven footwear. So do we see a high correlation between utility designed footwear and materiality? We are starting to see the consumer thinking about that, right? This also really plays back in as we start to think about how we communicate our designs, right? Because if they're a utility forward, then this materiality plays a very strong part in that. As we move to this next slide here, what you'll see is we then asked, so how often do you think about the material your shoes are made of, right? And we see very, very similar relationships. And to me, I thought Connie hit it right on the head when she was speaking about the biodegradable nature of wool and thinking about less landfill, less waste, right? I think that this is going to only grow in the future. And I think it's what would be interesting is, as we expand this study, would be to think about the materiality of shoes, but then also the materiality of other components, right? And we see IKEA is huge in this, right? Where they do a lot of their FSC sustainable forest products. They do a lot of their no VOC adhesives, right? Between their fiber boards, right? They are really trying to think about this materiality, but you'll notice it does not make it into the consumer facing sales material that much. So is this an issue of scale? Is this an issue of product? I would argue it was more of a product base, that shelving is less consumer interesting, right, than another one. So I think shoes has this amazing location to play in, where we can start to think about and really trumpet the power of the materiality from cradle ultimately to trash can, right?
So it looks like from what we learned in our survey during the poll here is that materials are really in the top 5 of importance as we start talking about construction of shoes. So very similar to some of the information that we saw from the consumer report as well. So if we start transitioning the materials into the object or idea of including wool as a conversation, you know, wool has typically been found mostly in apparel. It's a little bit new to the footwear conversation. And we really attribute that to mid to high range product lines. Sarah, from footwear discussions and developments, how do you feel about where wool plays a role in this?
I think Connie touched on this really well about it can specifically be engineered so its benefits can be received by the wearer. most effectively. So like Connie mentioned, in the insole where you get that extra bounce and loft, it's also odor neutralizing, another good reason to have it in the insole. Also, you know, the eco credentials of wool, that is biodegradable, renewable, recyclable, lend it to so many markets as a replacement to what was probably originally a synthetic. So you get that eco credential, but you also don't have to sacrifice any performance benefits.
Right. And, you know, Stefan, maybe you can build on this a little bit as well from a performance standpoint in yarn construction. Tell us a little bit about how wool plays a role in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think consumers, they know wool already from so many other textile applications, yeah, and they have built up a positive attitude towards all these properties of wool. They might wear it already for the workout in a wool and tencel blend, and now already know how it feels on the skin. And now they seem to be more and more open to try out wool also in other applications, like in our example in the footwear, and see if the same advantages can play a role here as well, like warming or even cooling. Yeah, so all these kind of things. And it seems like this is really more like a long-term trend also, and not only a short, let's say, fashion thing only. Yeah? They understand wool, they have the wool sweater already, they have the wool socks anyway, so why not try the wool shoe also and use all these advantages for themselves in their daily life. So I think is here, and we can build on this.
And Connie, from a design perspective, are there limitations or advantages of wool as a conversation in footwear components?
I think that there are a lot of different attributes of wool that people aren't really aware of. And things like water resistance and the antimicrobial. They don't really know this. They think of this as old technology, but it's really, if we can use it in a new way with the new technology and be able to put the wool where we need it, whether it's liners or the exterior, you have an abrasion resistance, a coarser type of wool on the exterior, or you can make it into jacquards. You can do a lot of different things with the wool on the exterior as well as the interior. Imagine somebody saying that you're going to put lamb's wool as a liner on the inside of a shoe. That, I mean, just the emotional thing, something soft. I'm going to put my foot into, like Tim said in one of this, I put my foot into a cloud, that kind of thing. So if we can create the emotional connection and meet these criteria that the customers are looking for in their shoes, I think wool fills all of that in not only the design, but also the function that we need it to perform. It's very durable as a fiber itself.
And emotion is a really good way of describing this. Tim, I think that's a lot of what we heard and the results that came out of what we heard from our consumer side as well.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. It was really that trifecta of emotion and then tactility and then energy, right? That's coming together, right? It was a really, really interesting study and how that came out, particularly around what is such a pedestrian, pun intended, material, right? So what we did is we then started digging into the shoe market itself, right? And this is always interesting because this has flavors of unaided brand recall, right? That is, do you know a brand? If we say, give us an athletic brand, right? And what we asked is we said, do you know a shoe brand that sells wool shoes? Right. So we didn't go in very specific, like a shoe brand that is 100% wool shoes, et cetera. What was really interesting to me in this data is the vast majority didn't know. Right. When you think of UGG, who has spent countless millions of dollars, and Allbirds, what, they just got another series of funding, right? I mean, the amount of money that is put on the internet between those two companies and shoes is gargantuan, right? They're not, their product story, their product material is not resonating with their product. Right, which makes me think that there is actually quite a bit of open space here, right? Allbirds, you'll know their tag is like the most comfortable shoe you'll ever own or something of that ilk, right? And it's interesting. I mean, I don't know what UGG's tag is, but that just goes to show you I'm not in their market set. But rather, I think that there is an opportunity here to be able to really claim the material, right? And really lead material first in how brands start to show up, right? And then let's take another look as we start to then, if we were to lead material first, right? Okay, well, then what would you think about the idea of a wool shoe, right? What two words would you gravitate towards most? And once again, you'll see we really wanted to build these poles, right? To create a polarity here, right? What's interesting to me is when you take a look at these, they're all in the middle, right? So when we said, does it feel more expensive or more affordable? I mean, it's roughly cut down the center. Same thing with skin irritation and breathable, and then strange and cool, right? For me, this is actually a really wonderful place to be, because when you see in data these kind of middle zones, it means you can create ways to pull consumers to the side, right? And when you get pulled to a side of a consumer, that is where conversion begins, right? When we start to really think about the brass tacks of this, ultimately it's selling products. And so, or selling a material. And so we really want to start to think about how we can start to pull the consumers into these different groups in around wool, around shoes, and really start to dimensionalize the product within this. So I think that it's actually quite interesting that we see this liminal space in here. What's wild is, this is always one of my favorites, is we ask you to think of someone who owns and regularly wears wool shoes, right? What is that perception? And this is always lovely, because this is a little bit both of asking the consumer to project outwards, but there's a ton of behavioral science studies that actually show that projecting outwards is a reflection of ourselves, right? And so this is a really nice reflexive behavior that we're seeing. Well, lovely, there was no gender driven here, right? So we see a split relatively right down the middle of who would own this. So they're being worn by men and women, right? The age, which is awesome, is 21 to 30. So this is high influencer category. This is setting trends, right? This is early young buyers, right? Who frankly have a longer buying life cycle, who will buy more pairs of shoes because they're going to live longer. So you can get into this group and actually get a repeat buying behavior that will have a longer tail of revenue off of this, versus selling to 70-year-olds. While they might buy a shoe that's beautiful, they're going to ultimately die sooner than a 20-year-old. And so we can't sell them as many. The other part that's very interesting to me is the income group. This is great because we are seeing the middle of, now remember, these were Americans. I know we have an international panel. Of course, the Quartr community can go international. This was an American subset, but this is right in the middle pocket of the American consumer. What is lovely is this is not perceived as effete, right? It would be a different group if we said, what about shark skin shoes? Right? All of a sudden we would start to, push down, and we might see these, like, oh, it's really expensive, or something like that, right? It's really, really lovely that the perceptions of these individuals are right in the middle, which is wonderful, because that is the bulk of the buying public, right? So if we could take one more slide, please, as we start to think about these insights, and we really want to kind of pull these three together into some practical, tactical executions. One is, wool has this amazing material value story, right? And we see that coming up again and again when people's perceptions of wool and the thinking about the materiality of a shoe, right? So there is a strong ability to align with value. Right. We also see targeting messaging. So that very little chart there that we just saw of income, of age, of gender, that's a media plan, right? We're already starting to be able to use this data to get at media and tactical work here. And then also this idea of emotion. I mean, I think that there is this tactility that we all love about wool, and we tend to gravitate towards it, right? But I think in the early stages of this webinar, we really went into this emotive concept. And I think that there is some ground to be had there, because we can pivot on that emotion to then move them into the materiality of wool, right? And so we can use this as kind of a step up idea to be able to move a consumer into an alternate mindset. So those are our three big takeaways from this. If there are any questions, you'll see some emails, and we're happy to reach out and answer whatever you got.
And one thing I wanted to jump in before we get into Q&A with, Denine leading us is, taking a look at the Quartr platform. One thing we wanted to share with the group is, the flexibility and the power of the Quartr community. It's a new platform. It's agile. It's, accurate because of that audience verification, but it's really based on community. And we like to define it as kind of people-powered marketing. And so what the platform allows, marketers and brands to do is really, get deep with consumers of all different ages, incomes, geo, wherever they may be, and ask questions in almost a near real-time format. And so once we post content, we are immediately collecting feedback that we can then share with marketers. So if there's urgency to, defining or answering a question that's been brought up within a company, we have the ability to do that. We were actually able to reach and get the information from our 1,000 respondents in less than a week. And we support that through different types of promotion, whether it's on social or engagement on the platform of rewarding consumers as they continuously come back, to engage with the platform. But we also wanted today to really just showcase the value of the data and research across understanding not only insights and preferences, but experiences. Tim, explained the design process and material selection that Connie went deeper in, and just to kind of highlight our ability to, utilize the platform for all sorts of different, data and research. But, going back to the whole basis of Quartr, it's based on community. And one of the things that, we found in putting this information together was the importance of strong business relationships and collaborations across, an industry, and how partners can help navigate the process, which, as we all know, is super complex, from the design of the shoe, the material selection, the creation of it, but also utilizing that data from a, media marketing perspective, and how we go about, promoting that to the shoe with the right language and messaging that can be, refined, defined, and then further refined through an ongoing use of a platform like Quartr. So, we wanted just to kind of bring that back and showcase how we worked from all different aspects of, the industry and bringing something to life, but the immediacy and the accuracy of a platform like Quartr, highlighting what we can do for you as it relates to, emotion design, but also brand perception, copy testing. We can do image testing and a variety of different things on the platform to really bring, marketing efforts and design efforts to life. So Denise, I think we're good. If we got any questions, we can go down.
Please, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. And we did have one that came through. Stefan, I think this one is directed for you. How long and how well is Suedwolle Group prepared to supply wool or wool blend yarns into the footwear market?
Well prepared, in short. We have an established program that we can always jump on. Yeah, so there are products that we can have on stock that we can use starting from tomorrow. The good thing is also most of the yarns, we have them in Europe, in Asia, and also in our US warehouse if needed. So there's immediate possibility to supply those solutions. And of course, we are also always open to start new development projects with new clients. If it's not fitting yet, then let's make it better, and let's find a better fitting solution and just mix materials or change yarns a little bit regarding the spinning technology and things like this. So yeah, we're ready to go.
I want to add to that, Stefan, I love the different types of wool that you have. You have things that are washable that fit in multiple different environments for footwear. You also have stuff that we love that is FR, so fire resistant, Phoenix. I love that because we have a lot of different customers that are not just traditional footwear, but maybe performance or protective footwear. even some of the military projects kind of thing, or that kind of response. And we absolutely love the way it runs on the machines. So it's you have a treasure trove of different types of performance type wool.
Thank you for the feedback, Connie. I will certainly let our R&D people know as well about that very positive feedback. I think, yes, you're right. I mean, we have to be very open in our thinking. Yeah, wool can be used for so many things, yeah, that we just need to discuss and then also see how we can bring it together with other fibers, like you mentioned, fire retardant fibers or even other natural fibers. So there's a lot we can discover together also for the footwear industry.
So I have another question that's come in, Sarah. This would be directed for you. How does Woolmark work with footwear developers to understand the application of wool in footwear construction?
We work on kind of two sides of the whole supply chain. We work directly with the suppliers like Suedwolle to take their new yarn developments and actually put them into a prototyping process with footwear makers, and then put them through a round of testing and trials to see how they perform and substantiate them for that end use. Then we take those prototypes or that recipe, that technology, and we transfer it to the brand and to the brand's nominated suppliers so they can expedite their development process into commercialization.
Perfect. We have one more question that's come in, Katie. How does Quartr gather and verify the consumer data?
So everything is gathered through our platform. So as soon as somebody responds, we're capturing that information and that data in our database. And we have the ability for a consumer to cash out, per se, when they reach a threshold of $20. And that makes us a little bit unique from some of the other platforms in the marketplace, which are either loyalty-based, points-based, or some other reward format. And we think the one attraction that we have and the positive feedback we receive from our community is the fact that you're actually earning cash as you're responding and sharing feedback, especially on the brands or experiences that you love. And so when a consumer reaches that threshold, we actually cash out and we verify the audience through a government issued ID. And we have real bank account information or other platforms that we can, pay out that reward to. And so we know that every consumer who's responding on the platform is who they say they are. And unlike a panel where you're doing a digital panel or such, you could actually, I could be responding to a survey about, men's t-shirts, and nobody's going to know the difference is simply because, we're not doing any verification. The difference is if we were responding, in this case, on shoes, and I decide to cash out, everybody who's had any, touch point with the data, they will know that they're collecting data from an older female, and that the information and who is responding is real. And so that's how we verify our audience.
Right. Sarah, there was somebody that came in that wanted to have some additional information from you. I'm sure you're on that, right?
Yeah, I see that. They're just wanting me to repeat how Woolmark works with the footwear industry and footwear developers. So we work with suppliers, like I said, Suedwolle earlier, who are great at developing new yarns and new technologies and offering them over to the Woolmark company to R&D with them. So we'll take those new yarns, work with footwear developers, mostly in our case, engineered knitters, on Stoll or Shima machinery. We put those yarns on the machines, create the prototypes, create the knit uppers, send them through testing and validation. And then we're able to substantiate the yarn for that purpose, for that type of production. And we transfer the technology directly to brands and their supply chains. So yeah, we pretty much create the recipe and expedite the brands in baking it.
So those are all the questions that I have. As we're coming to the end of this, we started with early experiences of our shoes. So I'd like to end with that also. So Connie, you have an amazing story that you provided to us earlier on shoes. I'd love for you to share that as we wrap up this discussion. and really talk about shoes, emotion, and back to what we've learned from this consumer survey.
I mean, from when we were little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, my first memory was a pair of hand-sewn moccasins, and my mom just sent these to me. She was cleaning out the house, so very appropriate. It showed up. I think when we're little kids, we wear things everywhere. When we love something, we really like something, and it carries through into our lives. So we keep buying the same brands. We'll buy the same pair of shoes in multiple different colors, kind of thing. And we really go back to things that are of comfort, of things that we love. And for me, being 2 years old and wearing these things everywhere, I mean, I was so disappointed when I grew out of them. And I think it's the same thing as we grow older. We go back to the things that we love. And I think this also ties in with what Tim is saying with all these, all the data, is that it's an emotional connection we have to the things that we buy, but also it is something that today people are looking at things that are an environmental. We're activist consumers and buying things that are not only great for us, but also for our planet.
I think that's a great way to say thank you for everyone being here, for our attendees that joined us. We will definitely push out the recording so everybody will have a chance to do this. And I thank you for all your time today and sharing experiences.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.